Classes in Wargame Design, a series of lectures based on George Philly's book, Designing Board Wargames, Introduction, to be available from Smashwords.com and Amazon Kindle. And today, Lecture 1, Introduction, Properties of All Games. Welcome to my lectures on Wargame Design. This course is particularly designed for people who have designed or are interested in designing computer games, but who have never had any real acquaintance with classic board wargames. There is a great deal of development that has been done in the theory and structure and rules of board wargames, much of which would be useful for designing computer games, much of which is also useful if you want to design your own board wargames. This course is designed for both audiences. I say lectures, and in fact, most of the course you will see me standing in front of a chalkboard talking. However, we occasionally have minor technical failures. The first few minutes of this lecture, all of Lecture 6. We occasionally have interesting weather phenomena. Lecture 7 could not be done in school because we had a blizzard. And so you will occasionally see lectures in an entirely different format. Let me emphasize again what the target audience of this course is. We have lots of people who have seen war games that are really just light war games, little plastic pieces where you roll lots of dice. We have lots of people who have played all sorts of computer games about warfare. However, there is an entirely separate category of games. The traditional name is hex and counter, in which we have a gridded map. We have little pieces of cardboard with lots of numbers printed on them indicating the properties of those pieces, and we have a particular style of play which in many ways is fairly uniform between different games. How is the course going to be laid out? There are two halves. The half that the viewer can see is me talking at my students. The half that the viewer cannot see is the students lined up into groups of one or two people, and the one or two people are doing an actual board war game design. The objective of the course for the students is to learn enough about board war games that they can design their own games. So having said that, how are my lectures going to be arranged? The opening segment of the course is on properties of games. Today's lecture is properties of all games. We'll have an additional lecture on particular properties that are singular to board war games, properties that in principle you could talk about for other sorts of games but aren't nearly as significant. We'll then advance to talk about a few issues that are significant for board war games. For example, we'll talk about history and breaking history up into periods. The periods that we invoke are periods determined primarily by military technology and how it was employed. And finally, I'll say a bit about military unit organization because there's a language there that we're going to be using a lot of. Because most students, at least in this course, have never actually played a real board war game, a significant chunk of the course is going to be concerned with learning how to play several classic games, Stalingrad, 1914, Panzer Blitz, actually playing the games, and therefore learning something about rules arrangements, modes of play, and themes, so that when we talk about many variations on all topics, all of the different ways a game board could be gridded, for example, when we do that, the student has played a few games and has some idea of why the professor is talking at vast length about something that seems either trivial or very abstract. So we will roll through and we'll talk about the classic games, and in the middle we'll start talking about many variations on one topic. After we discuss the play of Stalingrad and have people playing the game, I'll also discuss something about playtesting as it is usually done for board war games. Down at the end, We will talk about many topics. That is, the last part of the course. And as we have reached the last part of the course, I am now able to cut over to the real recording. The last part of the course will deal with examples of rules and how designers have solved various sorts of representation issues. How we represent issues related to supply, morale, production, research, intelligence and limited intelligence, combat, and movement. There are all sorts of basic military features, and somehow they have to be accommodated in the rules, and we'll consider examples of clever solutions of different levels of complexity. Of course, there are people whose temptation is to say, oh, we can make the rules more complicated, and this is the same as more realistic. And we rapidly move from the 4 pages of Stalingrad rules to Avalon Hill Advanced Squad Leader, which comes with a ring binder with 140 pages of fine print of rules. Do you want to move that infantry squad through a sanitary sewer? There's a full page of fine print on how to do it and what happens. Well, it's an approach to doing rules. Okay, so having said that, we're going to cover what's in the book I am in the process of writing. The book I'm in the process of writing being Designing Board Wargames, Introduction, but I'm hardly the only person ever to have done a book on board wargaming design. James Dunnigan, who was probably the most famous living board wargame designer, did the Board Wargames Handbook, which you can find on the net. And that discusses sort of what a designer of hobby board wargames does to move from we should do something on this title to here is the completed game. He covers a few aspects I won't, having to do with production and printing and so forth. However, I should also point out, for example, Philip Sabin and Peter Perla, who have both done books on designing wargames. Sabin is a college professor. He teaches at the Department on War Studies at King's College, and their interest in designing board wargames is twofold. A, we have a student course like this one. We have labs. The labs run a fixed 2 hours, and in those fixed 2 hours we will have students play a board wargame and learn something about warfare in different periods and what the challenges were and what the issues were and what was going on. Sabin proposes that historians could also use board wargames to study alternatives, that is, how things might have gone if you did things differently, or to understand why leaders did what they did. The classic example of this is undoubtedly, well, suppose the Battle of Gettysburg had ended differently. Now, the real Battle of Gettysburg was a bloody draw, which is all the Union needed. However, one could propose that Hancock had gotten control of the Union Army because Meade had been wounded, and Hancock had done a vigorous pursuit, in which case the Army of the Northern Virginia would have been pinned against a major river that was in flood and destroyed. You could also propose, there is a nice book on this by Peter Tsuris, a more aggressive Union activity could have destroyed the Army of Northern Virginia and ended the war a few years early. On the other hand, if you say, well, the Confederates grabbed Little Round Top and Big Round Top early, which is very bad for the Union position, most board wargames don't handle the actual Union response is, okay, we won't fight the battle here, we'll fight it at Pipe Mills as we had planned, which was a much better field for massacring whoever is trying to attack us. The other alternative, there are a series of novels by Turtledove on this, is that, the Confederates managed to win the battle and the war somehow. This was not trivial because Washington, D.C. had a larger army covering it than the Union Army at Gettysburg, backed by the most powerful fortifications up to that date in the history of the world. But if you connive that the Confederates win, you ask what happened next. And in Turtledove's novel, well, there is round 2 in 1880. There is World War I, in which the two sides are on the two sides of the World War I. There is a very different, completely different World War II, which you probably would not recognize, except the German National Socialists end up south of the Mason-Dixon line, where people very much and unpleasantly like them, and the country we think of, Germany, still has a Kaiser. Well, ignoring these minor details, it is possible to game out alternatives, and it is possible to arrange games that actually do this in a useful and effective way. So, having said that, there's also Peter Perla. And Perla's book on games, it's in the computer disc I handed out, rather the title is in the computer disc, you'll have to buy the book, discusses use serious games. That is, we are going to do a simulation of warfare or some aspect of warfare, and we are doing the simulation to learn what actually happens under warfare conditions with our tactics and their tactics and our weapons and what we know of their weapons, and we try to develop things. More or less everything, except Pearl Harbor and the supremacy of aircraft, was gamed out effectively by the U.S. Navy well before World War II started. All of the issues associated with island landings and logistics and production and what it would take were gamed out in considerable detail, so we actually knew what we were doing to some extent. Okay, so having said that, there are a bunch of books on that. There are also books, because board wargaming links to role-playing games, and I would in particular point out John Peterson's Playing with the World, which is extremely thorough and detailed and based on my personal library in fair part, which covers, well, how did we get from there is no such thing as a role-playing game to where we are now. So, there is a background. I am going to mention, since we're using games, first of all, some games are out of print. Whether a game is out of print or not, you can often find it on the internet in various used game sources, but there are also computer modules like Sun Tzu and Vassal and Cyberboard, and all of these let you play games electronically. They aren't artificial intelligences. The computer program does not supply one side. And I would say if you think you are going to write an AI to play one side in Stalingrad, you are going to have a very educational and challenging experience. However, what these computer modules do is they replace a board game for two people who are way far away. I'm sort of at the end of playing two board games with someone in England. We just use the internet. It's very effective. Okay. I've said game. I've said war game. There are people who will use other phrases. They will say simulation. There's a nice word. Simulation implies the pious hope that there's some vague semblance to reality, or historical simulation, or conflict simulation. Adjectives clarify what you're thinking about. However, sometimes adjectives put you in a box that you shouldn't be in. If I refer to a board war game as a historical conflict simulation, I've just said that anything that isn't historical isn't a board war game. So if it involves spaceships or magicians, if it's science fiction or fantasy, it sounds as though it's not a board war game. That is a very narrow vision perspective. It is a limiting perspective that damages how you think about things. If you say it's a conflict simulation, well, there are elements of warfare that really aren't conflict. For example, there is the wonderful Westinghouse game. Yes, Westinghouse, the people who make all sorts of other things. Logistics Command, which is about supply and maintenance and basically stops if the war starts. It's not about conflict at all, but it's a war game. It really is. Very clever one, too. So we have all of these positions. Some people will say strategic games. The point of saying strategic games or strategy games That's a 1965 phrase. It was originated to avoid the use of the word war. Under modern conditions, it's gotten much broader because there are these things called Eurogames, things like Settlers of Catan or Puerto Rico, that do not involve warfare at all, but certainly involve a lot of strategy. Okay, so we have sort of chugged ahead, and we have said vaguely where we're going, and now we will advance to Chapter 2 of the book, and I guess the first question we ask is, what is a game? What do we have if we have a game at all? And the first answer is you really have to have participants. A painting or a normal novel is not a game. Nothing, it just sits there. It never changes. A motion picture changes, but a normal motion picture, well, there's a famous Czech exception. A normal motion picture just proceeds from point A to point B, and if you watch it 4 times, it will do exactly the same thing. So there's a game, though, has participation. If it's a meaningful game, there are decisions to be made. Candyland, where all you do is roll dice, sort of looks like a game, but it's strictly a die-rolling contest. There are no decisions to be made. There are no resources to be allocated. There is nothing that you can do to, assuming the die rolls are viewed as being fixed by laws of nature, there's nothing you can do to change what is going to happen. So it's really not a game at all. You also need to have objectives, goals. The traditional phrase in wargaming is victory conditions. You have to be trying to go someplace. If you're not trying to go someplace, if there's nothing in the game that tells you where you're going, it's not a game in the same sense. Traditional examples of things that are kind of like games but not are SimCity, original form anyhow, or Second Life. They're environments in which you can do things, but they're not exactly games. Games therefore do have goals, and since you're making decisions about something, in some sense games must also have resources, something that you're making decisions about. The resource may be which path do I choose, or something equally simple-minded, but if there's no cost to your decisions, what does it mean? And I guess the other statement is it has to be a challenge. If you try to do a board wargaming on the German invasion of Luxembourg in 1940, several tank divisions who said hello to the Luxembourg policemen who were unarmed, yeah, it's a military event, but there's no challenge here. One side has infinite force relative to the other. There's nothing happening. So that, roughly speaking, is the sort of thing you put into a game. Okay, so having said this, we have a game. It's something that has decisions. It has conflict in some sense. It has, sides striving for a goal. We could also take examples of games and things you could have in games that, well, in some sense, enhance the game but are not critical. A traditional one is what is described as a variety of encounter. Now, you don't have to have variety of encounter. If I am playing chess, every time I move one of my pieces on top of one of yours, your piece will be removed from the board. There's no variety there. We don't roll dice to see which side's piece is on the board afterwards and which side piece is eliminated. It just happens. You could propose role-playing as an element. Role-playing in board war games, classical board war games, is really not exactly a feature. We'll discuss this at more length later. You could say, gee, we have war games. We're sitting around playing, but perhaps we're doing other things at the same time. We're watching an opera or watching a football game or talking or having pizza or whatever. And there's socialization. It's a game benefit, but it's not really a part of the game. Some people will talk about narrative tension. The notion in narrative tension is something that you see in development of a book. You are reading a book, and you have to do things to keep the reader's interest. So you have conflict events, and you gradually build up, and at the end, there is the big conflict. Now, you can design and try to design a game that resembles this, and there was a traditional motif in some computer games where the character starts out and the challenges get more and more and more severe until you get to the far end and there is the ultimate challenge and you either win or have to restart the computer. That is not necessarily a way you lay out a computer game, that is, or a chess game, for example. For example, in chess, you are playing, and if you connive to go down a major piece with no positional or other compensation, you are probably in severe shape and should resign. And if you actually said, let's play this out to the end, the game might go on another 50 pieces if the position was or 50 moves, I mean, if the position was clever. But there's not much point to it because major piece advantage, unless you have a major piece and your player is Mr. Kasparov facing you, who is about to destroy you anyhow, major piece is a loss and you might as well resign. So there are things that you can add on to a game that will enhance it, that aren't critical to its being a game. So having said that, let us advance and let us consider, for games in general, what are the major elements of a game? Now, I'm using elements in a particular sense. Medieval alchemists believed there were 4 basic elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Modern chemists would say there were 100. But if you look carefully at the medieval alchemists, what they were saying was that there were solids, liquids, gases, and plasmas, and we agree with them. If you look at Japanese alchemy, it added ceramic, wood, and silk. That is, it added glassy materials, it added composite materials, because wood is a cellulose lignin composite, and it added polymers, states of matter. So elements are sort of a basic way to say we have things. And what are the elements of a game? Well, there's representation. There are mechanics and style, and these are very overlapping but not quite the same. There is theme. I should remember components. There is shape. You see, I'm listing different sorts of things that you would have in any game. There is voice. And there is content. And now we will do 2 more passes through these 6 elements. I say there are 6, actually there's 7 now. The 7 elements are not necessarily limited to board war games. If I gave you a Euro game or a computer game or whatever, in a certain sense, you could go through the game and break down the game into all of these things. The representation is the simplest. It's what you see in front of you if you look at it. So if I see a bunch of well-painted toy figures on a table, I'd say, oh, it's a miniatures game. If I see a bunch of people dressed in medieval costume whacking each other with swords, I might say, look, live-action role-playing. Or I might say, help, call 911. That's representation. Mechanics and style. Mechanics are the things we assemble, put together to have a game. So if we are talking about engineers, we have gears, we have girders, we have across the street interocitors, we have the various components we assemble one way or another, and when we have assembled the components well, we have a game. However, there's a discovery that the mechanical engineers made a long time ago, which is that components in a certain sense are generalized. That is, if I talk about gear design, I don't have one set of formulas for describing gears and windmills, and another gears and transmissions, and another gears in pocket watches. Some of you have heard of pocket watches. The size is different, the loads are different, but they're all gears and the same basic ideas apply. Ditto for rules, there are mechanisms, and it's the same mechanism even if the details are very different. Style overlaps with mechanism. I'll give one example. Bidding or auctioneering. Bidding is a small part of a game. Avalon Hill, Victory in the Pacific. It's World War II naval warfare. It's the whole theater. The objective of each side is to score points. However, supposedly the Japanese have a small advantage. If you have two good players and they have at each other, the Japanese will routinely be ahead by a small number of points. So the way you even this out is that at the start of the game, the two players bid. And they're bidding to be the Japanese player, and they bid to give up a certain number of victory points, like 10 or 11. The person who makes the higher bid becomes the Japanese player, but pays the penalty that she starts the game bid a number of points behind rather than even. That's bidding, but the whole game is large and complicated, and the bidding is just to tune the victory conditions. On the other hand, there are games in which auctioneering is the whole thing. I have a set of paintings. The players make bids to buy the painting. They have some covert objective, a collection of paintings they're trying to accumulate. They have restrictions on how they may bid. And so there's a complicated set of rules, but it is a game in which bidding is almost everything you do in terms of the game feature. In that case, bidding has moved from being a mechanic to being a style. Theme is what a game is about. This is a game about World War II. This is a game about the Battle of Lexington. This is a game about getting 4-year-olds to behave. No, that's impossible. Never mind. 2-year-olds, anyhow. The theme is sort of the plot hook. It's what you might put on the back of the book, but there's a plot as well as a plot hook. We'll discuss that. If I ask someone, what sort of a game are you designing, many people will answer, not with any of these other things, but with the theme of the game, and they'll think they've given an answer. There are several very dangerous paths you can go on down if you focus too much on the theme. We'll come to those in a bit. Shape. Shape is a word I have lifted from the Japanese theory of the strategy of Go. In Go, we say that a set of positions is thin or thick. It's elegant and effective or overweight and clumsy. The notion of shape in a game is how much space it uses in a player's life. And I will start at the bottom end. Rock, paper, scissors. There are 3 options, 1, 2, 3. The 2 players stand like this, wave fingers at each other. There's a few moments total play. There is a known perfect strategy thanks to game theory. And takes up a few moments, that's it. At the other end, we may consider Campaign for North Africa. It's an SPI game. It has been played, the full campaign game, to completion. It's usefully played between two teams of about 5 players, 2 of whom on each side are ideally accountants who love their work. Campaign for North Africa, I think you could fit it on our 4 tables here, barely. There are thousands of components because it is the war in North Africa on a company level. I mean company. You have to keep detailed track of supplies and get them to the right place at the right time, where supplies include ammunition, fuel, food. I mentioned it's a desert. Water counts. And if you are commanding the Italians who used their starch as boiled rather than cooked into bread, I have just doubled your water demand because boiling spaghetti needs a lot of water. Well, the net result of this is it's large, it's complicated, there are several hundred playing hours involved for each of the participants. It's sort of at the other end from paper, rock, scissors. That's shape. No, shape, by the way, is not the shape of the game box. Almost all of the game boxes you will ever find, other than the Emmanuel Gaudi tile game, which is a hexagonal box, almost all boxes are simple rectangles. Okay. Components. Components is what falls out when you take the box upside down and shake it. A reasonable expectation, after all, it's a board war game. There should be a board, a playing board, a map. There should be the things you move across the map, the playing counters like the one I just erased. You reasonably expect there to be rules. There are probably a couple of extra components. There may be dice. There are probably tables and charts. But basically, it's a box more or less full of paper, and the paper does various things. Those are components. There are, however, more radical components. There was a French game, what was it called? Guerre à l'outrance, if I recall correctly. The bottom end of the box included an electronic gadget for resolving combat, and you stuck in cards that were sort of like Jacquard loom cards, and something unknown, I've never opened my box to see what it does, happened, and it resolved combat. A more simple version of this is the dice falling tower, where you have a plastic object with little flanges inside, and you drop objects into it, and you see which ones come out at the far end. It's a component. It's complicated. Historically, there have been fairly few board war games that have included significant electronic components. At one time, there was an enthusiasm for designing electronic gadgets to substitute for dice. And you pressed a button, and the counter ran at a huge speed, like 100 kilohertz. We're a little far back in time. And you held the gadget down for a bit and let go, and the number that showed when you let go was nearly random. Those are components. Voice. I am using voice in the literary sense. Actually, if you've played computer games, you've heard voice. First-person shooter. Does everyone wave if you've heard of first-person shooters? You don't have to confess having played them, but you've heard of them. First person, second person, third person. I, you, she, and of course, we. In English, it's the plural second person is the same as the first, you, they. So first person is rather familiar if you've played computer games. Second person, actually most people have seen second person. You don't necessarily recognize it. You've come to a peasant's hut. You're on top of a mountain. The hut is barely large enough for someone to lie down inside. You open a door, And there, leading up as far as you can see, is a 30-foot wide, gold-embossed marble staircase. That's first person singular. First person plural. Your party comes to a hut. The designated victim opens the door. You all see a 40-foot wide marble staircase inlaid with diamonds, leading up as far as the eye can see. You see, second person plural. Most board war games are played in the third person, in which you have an army or a fleet or a group of aircraft, and you are making the decisions that would be made by a substantial number of military officers and their staff. Now, sometimes you will get reviewers who are a little obscure on this and fixate on first person singular and complain that the game design is wrong. And the reason that the game design is wrong, if you look at the game design, is, what's wrong with it? Why, the player is taking the role of more than one human being in the real world. And the player is commanding not 5 or 10 units that a real officer does, but is reaching down 3 or 4 levels of command so that the army commander is moving battalions around. This isn't what happens in the real world anyhow. And there are people who fixate on first person and don't like the fact this isn't how board games are designed. They've sort of gone off on an unfortunate track. However, there are some other styles of voice. Let me give you an example. It was a dark and stormy night. The rain fell in torrents, except at occasional intervals when it was checked by a violent gust of wind which swept up the streets. For it is in London that our tale lies, rattling along the housetops and fiercely agitating the scanty flame of the lamps that struggled against the darkness. And that is from the greatest Victorian novelist, E.G.E. Bulwer-Lytton, and one of his famous novels. And I ask you, what voice is that in? And the answer is authorial omniscient. And the reason you can tell it is authorial omniscient is the subpiece, for it is in London that our scene lies. The author has dropped out of descriptive voice, out of he, she, you, to speak directly to the person. They have, so to speak, reached across the fourth wall to talk directly at you. So that's voice. The last piece is content. And content actually is not in the book yet. I didn't see this until quite recently. Content is the actual subject. So that if I am doing a book about, or a game rather, about the Battle of the Bulge, here is the General Montgomery, and here is General Eisenhower, and here is a list of the armies and corps and divisions and battalions and regiments and the detailed map. And the content is part of the game. It's the information that's included, so we can tell this is the Ardennes, it's not the Sahara Desert or the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. And content is a fundamental piece. Now, hiding behind this is one danger, and it's particularly a danger here and here. And it's very, well, it's not easy, but it is possible to do huge amounts of historical research and pile up vast information about the battle. Or it is possible to write more and more spectacular pitch lines or 2-paragraph sales efforts and talk about the game is about pirates and vampires and zombies. That's the theme. And at some point, your critic will sit there and ask the question, where is the game? A few of you have been at an event where I actually had to ask this a couple of times. And it is very easy to lose track of the fact that in particular, theme and content are not game. The game involves rules and goals and resource allocation. Well, you've got to choose what the resources are. That's the content. The game is not the same as any of these. So I have now gone down at a shallow level. I have discussed what you put into games. Now I think, let's see, I have a few minutes left. So what I will do for just a few minutes is to discuss representations and their history. And if we go back through the history of wargaming, there are things that were war games, except they were sort of isolated events. It's sort of like in computer games in 1958, someone had hooked up an oscilloscope and had something that looked much, I am told, much like Pong. Or the Brainiac K30, which was a home computer of 1958, loosely speaking. Similarly, you can point back into the distant past of past centuries to the first board war games. However, if you ask where did the hobbies come from, the first hobby that you can identify is miniatures, fighting battles with toy soldiers, either on the floor of a table, on the floor of the ground, or on a tabletop. The soldiers would be figures of lead or pewter, plastic is much more recent, or they would be stamped tin sheets shaped like little L's so they balance, painted with soldiers on one or both sides, and you would fight battles with toy soldiers. And that was miniatures. At some point, except it really boils down to Charles Roberts and his game Tactics, you come to something that is clearly recognizable as a board war game and whose progeny have continued forward to the present. And there is a game board, and there are little cardboard playing pieces, and there are procedures for handling movement and combat. It's a board game. The third piece in line, though I don't think we would have realized it at the time, are computer games. Now, I actually played Space War in '63 when it was first available at MIT, but in a certain sense that didn't go anyplace for the excellent reason that a PDP-1 cost 200 grand in a period when a car cost 2 grand. It cost the equivalent of $1 million or two, so you certainly weren't going to have one in your house. However, we can advance to the first computer gaming company. They're still around. 1970, they bought their first computer strictly for home entertainment purposes in 1971, and the company was Flying Buffalo. They are still in business. And the computer was a Raytheon 704. I believe they still have it. And from that, we advanced. But you didn't play the game on the computer. You sent your moves written on paper to them, and they typed it in on a teletype, and the computer did simultaneous movement and other things that could only easily be done with a computer. The actual reason for the computer was that it meant that the owner of the company could play in a game. If we advance a little bit, we come to 1973 or so. And two friends of mine, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, wrote a set of miniatures rules. And they were an adjunct for the medieval game chainmail for fighting what we would call skirmish miniatures called Dungeons and Dragons. They did not set out to invent a role-playing game. In fact, they didn't know they'd done it. But they did create it, and that's where role gaming comes from. Okay, what else do we have? Well, we're marching forward. There are some other types of games still. There are what we might describe as collectible, though collectible does not require that it be done with cards, and cards do not have to be used in a collectible game. Collectible card games, of course, card games are very old. Whist, canasta, mahjong, dominoes, that's a card game, at least with some sets of rules. So there is a card game, and the notion of collectability is that you spend money to get parts. More recent, people have tried doing collectible board war games, not very effectively. There are collectible computer games. We will not consider in detail the $10,000 Star Wars ship that got blown apart in 15 minutes. Some people have interesting ideas, and that one was certainly spectacular for the record books. But we have a series of representations. Oh yes, I mentioned role-playing games. There are also live-action role-playing games. You can find examples of live-action role-playing games back in the 20s. They were parlor games. You didn't have television to watch. The player piano had gone through all of the music rolls you had. That was the common piano of the time. However, you went to live-action role-playing games. You played detective in the house. Or you march off to Pennsylvania, you and 10,000 friends, and refight medieval battles with the Society of Creative Anachronism. Medieval battles that are much larger than most battles that were actually fought in medieval times. Because you get thousands of people together. And you can actually simulate most aspects of warfare of the period. There seems to be no interest in my suggestion that we should genetically engineer traditional diseases like Black Death so they don't actually kill you, and you could then experience the serious problems of medieval siege warfare. No one seems to like that idea. In any event, these are representations, and if someone who knew very little about wargaming were to look at a war game, they could look and say, oh, that's miniatures, that must be a board game. I see a computer, I know what a role-playing game is. There are cards here. Representation is the general sort of thing. We are going to be stuck here. I have, however, run us out of time, so we are done until the next class. Class dismissed.